What I'll show you in a few slides sketches a perspective that is shared by the Open Building Commission members. We've been a commission now for about 18 years. We have members all over the world who basically share a set of principles that I'll explain to you, and hopefully there'll be a way to show a link with the principles that are espoused in the Smart Buildings discourse. Well, it's rather a truism to say that cities are never finished. We build, we change, we adapt, we tear down, we rebuild, and it's a very messy, extremely messy process that all of us in our one way or the other are trying to make sense of. The sustainability agenda, of course, is part of this discussion. How do we do things that are sustainable and long-lasting? But of course, we all know that everything won't last forever, and we change things. So we have to think beyond technical solutions, because technology, as I think someone said before, is just part of the equation. We have social structures, we have political structures, we have decision-making, and so I'm going to try to make a link here with what I've heard from the Smart Cities presentations and the open building perspective. From what I've understood, Smart Cities emphasize flows of physical and social capital. As Chris said, there's the cyber-physical systems that are at work. All of these complex, non-homogeneous systems involve complex networks of communication and hopefully pay attention to everyday citizens in the co-creation of quality and environment. And of course, open building itself shares this understanding of physical and social capital. And I think our contribution may be in the introduction of the idea of a hierarchical level of intervention. So what does that mean? Well, it means that as our cities continue to change, we find that there's a need to balance things that change quickly and things that don't change so fast. What can and should be permanent and what can and should be changing. This picture of the Ise Shrine I always use it in lectures because it's renewed every 20 years and has for 1,000 years. And it's an example of rituals of renewal that are deeply embedded, for example, in Japanese culture. But we renew everything all the time, and making sense of that to make smart cities is a key issue. So not only do physical systems change, but the decision-making about physical systems tends to be rather complex. So we generally say that the shared decisions, the decisions that take a long time to make and that have a long lifetime, are generally political in nature. They're either dictated by somebody, by some level of government, or by some corporate mandate, or they're democratically established, but they are shared in essential terms. On the other side of the decision-making story is the individual interests that are tending to be short-term, that change more quickly, and therefore, how do we balance those two worlds of decision-making? So that means that inevitably, I believe, and I think observation of city changes over long periods of time reveal this, the city structure tends to be permanent to the urban fabric. The urban fabric is permanent to the buildings. The building is permanent to what goes in the buildings, and what goes in the buildings is permanent to the equipment that we deploy to make buildings occupiable. And I think it's not a surprise to say that this hierarchical structure, when it's recognized and instantiated in planning and in decision-making, will help us manage communication up and down that hierarchy and helps reduce friction when change takes place. So, for example, the city infrastructure, that means the main highways and utility systems and waterways and so on, those tend to last for a very long time. But then within that, we have the urban fabric with its own infrastructure, its own streets, its own urban patterns, and that tends to be permanent to buildings, which come and go at a much more rapid clip. But once you have a building, it is permanent to what we call the fit-out. The buildings you see on the right in Chicago are there for a relatively long period, maybe 50, 75, or 100 years, but we all know that the tenants change and bring in their new equipment and their new partitions and their new computers and new lighting systems and so on. And then within that, we have computers that change and so on. So there is a hierarchy of in the built environment, and it tends to relate to certain decision-making levels as well. As this general model on slide 7 attempts to show. At the left, we have more collective entities and more collective physical systems, and on the right, we have more individual decisions and more personal environments. And these levels are actually evident internationally and have shown themselves to be evident over history. So this idea of levels of intervention helps organize decision-making towards greater effectiveness. There's evidence to that, and I'll explain more if I have time or if there's interest. But what is important to say is that these levels have very difficult, sometimes, dependency relations between them. For example, those operating on the urban infrastructure level do in fact dominate decisions on the urban fabric level, just like the architect and landlord of a base building do in fact dominate what the tenants can do, what they can bring in, and how they can deal with their own space. So there is a dominance relationship from the top down and a dependency relationship from the bottom up, and these communication links have to do not only with decision making but with the operation of physical systems. Ultimately, I believe that you would all agree that society benefits when everyday environment is healthy and alive, when its energy performance can be organized on levels right down to the home. So what matters is that we think that design and planning are always struggling to deal with the time dimension. Second, that change and permanence are realities that must be recognized in our decision-making, in our physical systems planning, in our development of infrastructure. Third, that levels of intervention can be helpful in structuring decision-making from the national level to the dwelling level. And then fourth, that distribution of control rather than centralization of control can be troubling, but it is a good thing if managed in a smart way. I always struggle with the word integration because it smacks of dictatorial, centralized control, and I think the reality is that we know that decision-making is highly disaggregated, and that often makes for a healthy situation. So we do find in many different countries evidence that clients are organizing their decision-making around this wonderful diagram, which was developed by the Canton Bern, Switzerland Office of Properties and Buildings. It's an acquisition method that now is used to procure all of their public facilities. They see the primary system as a 100-year investment that is long-term and relatively unchangeable. They see the secondary system of their physical real estate assets as having a shorter life cycle, and the tertiary system, as they call it, is a very short cycle investment. And it's interesting that that model, the crate, the bottles, and the liquid, is an exact overlay with the way American, Japanese, Chinese, European office building procurement processes are organized. So it's nothing new, but we find that it's very helpful to explain it. So an open building and smart cities viewpoint entails a number of shifts of perspective. Architects always, of course, like to build monuments, but we need to think about everyday places, the ordinary environment. We need to think not static form, but dynamic form. Static systems are no longer what we face, but we face dynamic cyber-physical systems in very complex, non-homogeneous artifacts like cities. We need to quit driving our decision-making on the basis of suspected function, but rather for capacity for changing function. And then we need to think not what is special, but what is shared, and we need to move from this notion of unified, centralized design to distributed design. So, in conclusion, the questions really that matter are not technical, but they're concerned with smart decision-making methods that correspond to the realities of how cities transform.